Welcome to our Meet the Author videos. This one is with Kearns, author of HR Strategy.
Hi, my name's Kearns. I've worked in the HR field for over 30 years. I do consulting, I write, I teach, and hopefully I can give some good ideas to people about how to manage human resources.
Why should people buy your book?
I think the main reason is every HR director worth their salt will say they've got an HR strategy. This book actually shows you how to do it, and it also shows you how to demonstrate the results from HR strategy. So much so that it's now an MBA level textbook. It's also bang up to date in terms of really tapping into subjects such as human capital management and evidence-based management, which are very, very hot topics. So it's up to speed with all the latest thinking in strategic management circles.
What are the 3 key benefits of HR strategy for a HR professional?
I think the first benefit is just to improve their professionalism. I think also one thing that HR people can always do with is more business credibility. And the third is if they get both of those first two, it should aid their career progression.
What are the 3 key benefits for students?
I think that a professional HR student will get very solid theory, but also very solid practice. And for students who come to HR not as their main subject, I think it's a very good general introduction to what strategic HR is really all about in practice.
What has been changed and updated from the first edition?
Well, it's a completely new rewrite, really. I fundamentally rewrote the book the second time around, and the biggest difference is it's now written directly for a chief executive. Ideally, the HR director hands it to the chief executive, but it is written from that perspective. I think the other thing is it's now written much more as a hands-on how-to-do book, which is quite difficult in HR strategy, so it's meant to be very practical. And one thing that I've introduced that we only skirt around the first time is the whole question of human systems, which are becoming more and more important in organisational management.
What is your background and what kind of companies have you worked for or with?
When I left university with an economics degree, I went straight into industrial relations, so I'm a lifelong HR professional. I've also had a role in training and development and generalist HR work, and I've worked in engineering, construction and manufacturing, so some pretty hard-nosed businesses. So most of my experience has been hard-won, and I think that's why I bring a practical view of what HR is all about.
Which HR leader do you most admire and why?
I think this is an interesting question. I think the book on HR strategy that I've written is actually saying that the chief exec has to be the HR leader as much as the HR people themselves. And if I was going to choose one, then it would actually be a guy called Eiji Toyoda, who started the Toyota empire many, many years ago, 70 odd years ago, who, when he was putting the plans together for Toyota, absolutely understood the role that good people management played.
Can you give me a brief summary of how companies should balance the needs of the business between the needs of individuals?
I think it's a tricky question. Most organisations have their own strategic goals or objectives, and that's what they're there for. The fact they employ people is a means to an end, and so you could say, well, it's the organisation's needs that we need to look after. But I think we're now all mature enough to understand that you only get the best out of people if they really want to take a full part in helping the organisation achieve its strategic goals. And I think that's the whole trick of HR strategy, to get those two balanced perfectly.
Can you provide a brief summary of one example that HR strategy gives?
I think one of the most interesting examples in the book is that of the Danish engineering consulting company Arup and Partners, who have quite a long and illustrious history. And I think what particularly appealed to me about their approach to people management was the story from their current chief executive, who said they often find people who they like and really want to attract, and then they make a job for them. So they sort of get the talent first and then fit the organisation around them, which I think is a fascinating approach to HR strategy.
What are the current challenges facing the HR profession?
I think there's two joint challenges. The first is actually to get in amongst the key decision makers, and the second is to know exactly what you're going to contribute when you get there, and they go hand in hand. You're not invited to that top table unless they can perceive that you've got a great contribution to make.
What's the most important issue that businesses should take into account when planning their HR strategy, and why?
I think this is the nub of the book, really. I think what I used to say in the first edition was that an HR strategy should be very aligned with the business strategy. My own thinking's moved forward now, and it says that both have to happen simultaneously. If an organisation is going to be the highest performing, highest value creating organisation it can be, then when it's formulating its business strategy, it has to formulate its HR strategy at exactly the same time for it to work well.
What impact has the recession had on HR strategy?
I think the obvious short-term impact has been pretty disastrous. I think most companies, when put under a lot of cost pressure and businesses dropping off, are bound to look at reducing headcount. And that can happen outside of an HR strategy, or it can be part of an HR strategy. But I'd like to think that every cloud has a silver lining, and I think some really good things can come out of the current recession, in that organisations will really start to think twice about how they manage people for the future. And if HR people really get their strategic act together, I think this burning platform could provide a great jumping off ground really for the future.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to start a career in HR?
I suppose the best and simplest advice is know exactly what you're letting yourself in for. If you come into HR because you like policies and procedures and administration, then fine, there's always going to be quite a great deal of that sort of work. But this book is about HR strategy. This is for strategists. And I think if you're going to come into HR with a view and an ambition to reach the highest levels, then this will provide a sort of career path for you that will take you way beyond the transactional and the administrative role.